Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on our channel. So this week we're talking all about ranunculus and how we're actually growing them this year. So even though we're entering our 4th growing season here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, believe it or not, I have actually never grown ranunculus prior to this year. I've always loved these flowers, and seeing pictures of ranunculus in bloom was one of the things that really drew me into growing flowers in the first place. But for years I avoided growing ranunculus myself because I was so intimidated. If I'm being honest, ranunculus were one of those things that seemed like only experienced farmers were actually growing. And even now, I'm not quite sure that I fit into that category, but I'm more willing now to at least give something new a try. I mean, if this all goes right, I'm obviously going to be super happy. And even if I don't get any blooms this year, if this whole process doesn't turn out like I want it to, I think at least this will be a teaching moment and I'll be better equipped to try growing ranunculus again next year. I'm definitely not giving up on this crop anytime soon. I know that at some point I will be successful. I wanted to start this video by showing you our current setup. And then I'll rewind a bit and show you what we did to get to this point that we're at now. So as you can see behind me, this is how we're growing our ranunculus this year. And I'm going to give you a closer look. These are actually bulb crates that I sourced from a local greenhouse. For the most part, our crop is looking green and healthy. Yes, we do have a small portion of our plants that are a little bit yellow and stressed. It's definitely been an unusual spring for us here in West Michigan. We've had lots and lots of rain here these past few weeks. And now we're experiencing some unusually high temperatures for this time of year. So I'm not surprised that some of these plants looked at the way that they do. I'm actually more surprised by the fact that there's as many of these that look as healthy as they do. Now, I decided to grow in crates this year because I always believe that you gotta use what you got. And since we don't currently grow in a greenhouse or have an unheated hoop house, using these bulb crates, it seemed like the next best option for us. Well, we certainly could plant our corms out into our garden in very early spring. I feel like this setup is a little bit more flexible. These plants, they get a little bit more protection because I have them close to my house. It's convenient enough where I can throw frost cloth over them if need be, or in more extreme conditions, I can even move each individual crate to an entirely different environment. I also like that I have a bit more control over the soil. You know, in our regular flower field, we do have a bit of clay, so I like that with this more tender crop, I can use a better draining soil, especially in early spring where the temperatures are usually cooler and the water doesn't dissipate nearly as fast. So now that you've seen just a bit of our current setup, let's talk about how we got here. We ordered our corms and they were shipped to us last fall. Here in West Michigan, we are considered zone 5B or 6A, and I knew that ranunculus were not hardy enough to survive our winters. So I decided that I would start my corms in the very early spring. Now, since corms they're shipped in a dormant and dry state, I simply stored my corms in a cool, dry spot in my basement until I was ready to start this crop. One of the most confusing parts of growing ranunculus, in my opinion, is understanding their timing. Ranunculus are a cool season flower. They bloom in the early spring season and they actually die back as summer starts and the temperatures begin to rise. This means that when you're growing ranunculus outside in a cooler region like here in Michigan, the goal is to start them 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. Now our last frost date is typically in mid-May, so my goal was to start my corms in mid-March and have them ready to plant outside mid-April. Now, like I mentioned, corms are shipped in a dormant and dry state, so when it's time to start, it's best to pre-soak your corms. I simply soaked my corms in room temperature water for about 4 hours. I then planted them in 50-cell trays, making sure that the legs of the octopus-looking corms, making sure that those were pointed down. Once planted, I placed these trays in a cool and dark spot until I noticed them beginning to sprout. To me, this was such a counterintuitive part of growing ranunculus. My first instinct was to place my trays under grow lights, like I do with almost all my other seeds. But everyone I talked to said that corms need darkness and cooler temperatures to sprout. Since I'm not yet an expert myself, I decided it was best to listen to what more experienced growers were doing. And sure enough, after a couple weeks, I noticed a bit of growth from my corms. Once I started to see green emerging from the soil, I moved my trays and placed them underneath grow lights to help produce healthy and robust plants. Again, ranunculus like it cool, so my grow lights were set up in an unheated portion of my house. I kept them there until about mid-April, when I then started to harden off my ranunculus and prepare them for the transition to the outdoors. Now, the crates themselves didn't need any fancy preparation. You'll notice that I had my crates stacked too high. And I did this to allow easier drainage. Ranunculus, they don't like having wet feet, and so having space to allow for extra water to drain was something that I felt was really necessary. You'll also notice here that I didn't line my crates with newspaper or craft paper. I didn't want to inhibit root development or restrict airflow in any way. So I filled my crates without any sort of lining. And even though bulk crates, they do have, openings on the sides and on the bottom, I had no problem filling each crate with an ample amount of potting soil. Even with as much rain as we've had these past few weeks, my crates aren't getting washed out. You can see that they've actually retained almost all of their original soil, which they started out with. After my crates were filled, all I had to do was to plant my ranunculus. Now, I'm still experimenting with spacing. From what I've gathered from other growers that grow their ranunculus in crates, some try and fit as many as 18 to 20 plants per crate, and others squeeze only 6 or 7 per crate. I know that ranunculus, they do need ample space, and so I placed about 9, no more than 10 per crate, and so far it seems to be working great. And that's really all there was to this. We had a few frosty nights last month. While I wasn't too worried about these ranunculus surviving, anytime the temperature did dip below 28 degrees, I made sure to throw some frost cloth over them. Hopefully soon we'll start to see blooms. As always, I'll be sure to film the results so that I can share more of that with you in a later video. But in the meantime, if you'd like more updates, be sure to give us a follow over on Instagram, where I always share more of the behind the scenes and the daily happenings on our flower farm. Now, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in today as we shared a little behind the scenes peek into how we're growing ranunculus this year. It's always my hope that once you see how we do things on our farm, that you'll be inspired to give them a try in your own gardens. Maybe you'll find, like me, that ranunculus aren't nearly as intimidating to grow as they first appear. So that's all from me today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you would, we'd really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up and you hit that subscribe button below. And as always, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye guys.